The next morning, as soon as He Yen woke up, she said to Fu Xinqing, remember to come in the afternoon, and I'll cook for you. Fu Xinqing raised an eyebrow and asked, you're going to cook? Unaware of his teasing, she nodded and replied, yes, I'll make fried fish, stewed meat, steamed meatballs, everything. My mother said that a woman should not only be able to handle public affairs but also be skilled in the kitchen. Fu Xinqing couldn't help but laugh but was also cautious not to provoke her. He said, all right, I'll do whatever Madame Yen asks me to do. He Yen nodded in satisfaction, waved him away, and added, off you go, don't think I can't see that you're secretly delighted. Fu Xinqing, I'm telling you, don't peek at people through the door crack, it's not polite. Then, He Yen drove back to her parents' home. When she entered the house, everything was just as her parents had left it. She closed the door and went into her bedroom without even taking off her coat. Holding her breath, she opened the drawer beside the bed. As expected, she found a brand new mobile phone and an envelope beneath her clothes. The envelope contained her friend's ID card and bank card, with the password written on it. At this moment, He Yen couldn't control her emotions any longer and covered her mouth as she cried. After wiping away her tears, He Yen knelt on the floor and turned on the new mobile phone. Out of caution, she didn't call Yang Yuanze directly. Instead, she connected to the mobile phone network and used her email to contact him on the other side of the ocean. The message was written in the tone of an old classmate reminiscing about the past, but He Yen knew that Yang Yuanze would understand the hidden message. Thankfully, it didn't take long before she received a call from a new mobile phone number. Liang Yuanze's familiar voice sounded on the other end, clearly filled with urgency. Yen Yen? It's me, He Yen replied. Time is limited, so let's keep it short. My parents are on their way to New York. Have they contacted you? Yes, Liang Yuanze confirmed. Your mother called me. I'm planning to pick them up when they arrive in New York. He Yen continued, remember what I'm about to tell you. My parents will arrive in New York the day after tomorrow, which is New Year's Day in China. Try to divert their attention and find a place to hide temporarily. Be cautious, they may have Fu Xinqing's informants. You can take my parents to a hotel and confuse Fu Xinqing's spies before slipping away. Remember to discard their 2 cell phones, as well as your old number. Never let Fu Xinqing find you again. Liang Yuanze, smoking a cigarette, muttered, I understood your plan as soon as your mother called me. He Yen whispered, Yuanze, is this going to be very difficult? Liang Yuanze lowered his voice, emphasizing each word, remember what we said before. I promise to wait for you at the gates of hell, ready to hold your hand and pull you out of any predicament, Yen Yen. My hand will always be there, waiting for you to grab it. Tears welled up in He Yan's eyes, and she grumbled softly, Liang Yuanze, don't say these things to me now. If my eyes get all puffy, that scoundrel will notice. Liang Yuanze chuckled deeply, his tone serious, you don't need to worry about your parents. I'll take care of them. Focus on staying safe and wait for my updates. He Yen nodded and explained, okay, I'll turn off this phone now and switch it back on during the night on New Year's Day. We'll use this number to stay in touch. After a brief pause, Liang Yuanze whispered, Yen Yen, I love you. For the first time in a long while, He Yen displayed a genuine smile and softly replied, I love you too, always and forever. With resolve, she disconnected the call. In the afternoon, as He Yen was preparing to cook for Fu Xinqing, the doorbell rang. She rushed to the door, clutching a kitchen knife tightly in her hand. It was Fu Xinqing outside. He raised an eyebrow, eyeing the knife in her hand, and asked playfully, what's with the murderous look? As He Yen was about to respond, Jiang appeared from behind her, holding some items, and asked, Miss Yen, where should I put these? Fu Xinqing chuckled and approached her, wrapping his arms around her waist. He whispered in her ear, don't you like them? I bought them for you. He Yen looked up at him, her tone weak, Fu Xinqing, you've really outdone yourself. I know you're wealthy now, and I don't mind you spending your money. But buying so many bags at once and asking me to store them here. When my parents see this, they'll scold me, seriously. Fu Xinqing grinned and replied, but I like doing this. I enjoy spending on you. He then instructed Jiang, go ahead and put up the couplets. I'll handle the rest. Swiftly, Fu Xinqing removed his suit jacket and entered the kitchen. He couldn't help but tease her, are you heading to the kitchen or to a battlefield? You can leave the rest to me. He Yen looked surprised and asked, you can cook? Fu Xinqing began preparing food and said confidently, survival skills, my dear. You go and take a break. He Yen stammered but insisted, if you say that, I'll handle the most challenging part, steaming the rice. Suddenly, Fu Shenqing's mobile phone in his coat pocket rang. Without thinking much, he told He Yan, "Pass me the phone." He Yan hesitated for a moment before retrieving his phone. When she saw the caller ID, her expression changed. She remembered that it was Chen Hegua's mobile number. He Yan looked puzzled for a moment. Fu Shenqing asked her, "Whose phone is it?" "I don't know. It's an unknown number," she replied, holding the phone. Fu Shenqing nodded and said, "Answer it and put it on speaker." He Yan pressed the answer button and brought the phone near to Fu Shenqing's ear. Fu Shenqing leaned in closer, and they both listened to Chen Hegua's voice on the line. "Hello, Mr. Fu, I am Chen Hegua." Fu Shenqing was taken aback and turned to look at He Yan. It was too late for her to pretend not to hear, so she stared at him in surprise. He Yan felt there was no need to listen further and didn't want to witness Chen Hegua's stupidity, so she placed her phone on the table, sneered at him, and walked out of the kitchen. Fu Shenqing then addressed Chen Hegua in a cold voice, "What is it?" Chen Hegua replied, "It's nothing. I just wanted to apologize for misunderstanding you about the fingerprint situation. I will send it back to you as soon as possible." Fu Shenqing responded icily, "That's not necessary. I don't want to dwell on the past. Goodbye." Worry crept over Fu Shenqing, and he pushed open He Yan's bedroom door. She was changing clothes and didn't look back as she coldly stated, "Please knock on the door next time." He Yan glanced at him, casually put on her sweater, picked up a mobile phone, posed for him to take a picture, and joked, "Mr. Fu, you look quite good as a housewife. Can I take a few pictures and sell them for money?" Seeing her like this, Fu Shenqing approached with a smile and quipped, "Miss Yan, such photos won't fetch much. It's better to take some bedroom photos and sell them to Fu Corporation's Crisis Public Relations Department." He Yan nodded, playing along, "Good idea." Fu Shenqing then explained, "Yan, I still have some matters to attend to with the Qin family. It's related to the young girl. Don't dwell on it. It doesn't concern you." He Yan knew exactly what he meant but didn't dare to show her feelings on her face. She hesitated for a moment before saying, "Nevertheless, I would advise you to be lenient." Fu Shenqing carefully observed her expression and finally agreed, "All right." He Yan immediately brightened up and said, "Is dinner ready? I'm hungry." Fu Shenqing served the meal, and He Yan enjoyed it so much that she complimented him. After they finished eating and settled on the sofa, He Yan noticed that Fu Shenqing didn't seem to have any intentions of leaving her house. She said, "You can sleep in my room. I'll sleep in my parents' room." Fu Shenqing was a bit surprised and asked, "Why?" She clearly didn't want to be too intimate with him at home, but she replied earnestly, "Are you planning to celebrate the new year? It's a special occasion. Even if you don't need to fast or bathe beforehand, you should still pay attention to it. It's a sign of respect for your ancestors, do you understand?" Fu Shenqing didn't fully grasp these customs, so he muttered, "I won't touch you. We can sleep in the same room." He Yan couldn't help but stand up and say, "All right then, sleep well by yourself." As she headed to the door, she stopped and turned back, telling him, "Don't call me tomorrow morning. It's my time of the month and I'm quite irritable. There's food in the fridge. Just heat it up in the microwave." Fu Shenqing chuckled and agreed with her. With her instructions, Fu Shenqing refrained from waking her up the next morning. She got out of bed after hearing him leave and went to the window to peer down. A car was waiting for him downstairs. Ah Jiang, whose arrival she hadn't noticed, stood beside the car, opening the door for Fu Shenqing as he exited the building. Only when the car had disappeared from sight did He Yan finally breathe a sigh of relief. She returned to her bedroom, checked the drawer beside her bed where the mobile phone and ID card were hidden, ensuring they hadn't been tampered with. She turned her mobile phone back on and meticulously researched the train schedules for the upcoming night, committing to memory all the possible trains she might take. Throughout the day, Fu Shenqing didn't make any contact with her. It was only at night that he called and asked, "What are you doing?" Though she was clearly sitting on the sofa, lost in thought in front of the TV, she responded with a smile, "How about you?" "Enjoying the festivities. I'm watching the kids set off fireworks. It's quite noisy." "Listen," he replied, as if he had moved the phone slightly farther away to capture the sound. Through the receiver, she could hear the cacophony of children's cheers and laughter, echoing amidst the crackling fireworks. It was a stark contrast to her solitude and desolation. A surge of bitterness welled up in He Yan's heart. If it weren't for the man on the other end of the line, she would likely be with her family of 4, or perhaps accompanying her parents on a trip at this moment. In any case, she wouldn't be alone in front of the TV, watching others' reunions and celebrations. When Fu Shenqing asked if she could hear the noise, she smiled and replied, "It's certainly lively. Fortunately, they don't allow firecrackers in the city, otherwise, I wouldn't be able to watch TV." Fu Shenqing chuckled twice. It seemed someone had called him at the party, and he didn't linger on the call with her. He hung up, leaving He Yen to sit there and gaze at the television, her thoughts drifting back to the first New Year's they had spent together. The next day, He Yan's old phone rang in her hand. When she picked up, Fu Xinqing's voice came through the receiver. "Yan, get up and open the door. I'm outside." He Yan hesitated for a couple of seconds before uttering an "oh," and then promptly hung up the phone, leaving her other mobile phone still active. She tried to compose herself as she spoke to Liang Yuanze. "Yuanze, Shenzhaiji is here. He's outside the door, and I might not be able to leave." Liang Yuanze's heart felt like it was shattering, but he replied calmly, "Don't worry, Yan. Handle it as usual. You don't need to concern yourself with matters here. I'll take care of everything." Feeling a bit flustered, she countered, "No, please take your parents first, and I'll find another way." Liang Yuanze silenced her protests with a firm tone. "Listen, Yan, trust me." His soothing voice seemed to have a magical effect, calming her from her initial panic to a composed state. Without further ado, she switched off her mobile phone. 3 or 5 minutes later, when she didn't open the door, Fu Xinqing appeared to be somewhat puzzled. He called Yan again and inquired, "Why aren't you opening the door?" She feigned sleepiness and replied with a faint "oh." After a brief pause, she suddenly opened the door, asking, "Fu Xinqing, are you really out there?" He seemed doubtful but was deceived by her excellent acting skills. He couldn't help but chuckle and question her, "What are you saying?" Wrapped in a heavy quilt, her hair disheveled, she resembled a silkworm pupa about to spin its cocoon. He grabbed her by the waist and laughed, "I missed you, so I came." He unceremoniously tossed her onto the bed and initiated their intimate encounter. For some inexplicable reason, her body felt tense, as if she were on edge. Fu Xinqing sensed this and, gasping, "Ah Yan, you're going to be the death of me." Her body's natural response couldn't suppress her inner repulsion. Fearing he might detect her true feelings, she hugged him tightly around the neck, bringing her lips close to his ear as she declared, "Shinjijie, I can do it." He couldn't resist that invitation and responded with a passionate kiss. Afterward, they fell asleep in each other's arms. However, He Yan couldn't close her eyes for a long time. She contemplated retrieving the sharpest knife from the kitchen, butchering him while he slept, and then making her escape. Unexpectedly, as she shifted slightly in bed, Fu Xinqing instinctively tightened his grip on her. He groggily asked, "What's wrong? Are you uncomfortable?" Suddenly, she recalled Liang Yuanze's words, Yan, trust me, I'll handle everything." Turning around, He Yan muttered softly, "Your arm is too heavy, I can't sleep. If I wake up tomorrow with a sore neck, you'll be in trouble." Fu Xinqing raised his arm off her pillow and hugged her instead, asking, "Is this better?" She adjusted her sleeping position and replied, "Yes." As a result of that night's sleep, Fu Xinqing's entire arm was numb when he woke up the next morning. He had a ready excuse to stay in bed and assign He Yan the task of making breakfast. Yan, fearing that Fu Xinqing might discover the secret in the closet, pulled him out of bed and remarked, "Come on, don't be like an old man." In the kitchen, Yan emphasized, division of labor, cooperation, and mutual affection. Suddenly, she heard her mobile phone ringing in the living room. She peeked out and pretended to be nonchalant, saying, "It seems like it's your phone. This time, you should answer it yourself." Fu Xinqing turned around, went to the living room, and took the call. After a brief conversation, he returned to the kitchen, addressing He Yan by her name. When she heard that, she turned to look at him, seeing a hint of seriousness on his face. Her heart tightened, but she maintained a casual tone and inquired, "What's going on?" Fu Xinqing gazed at her and said, "It appears that Liang Yuanze picked up your parents for a ride. There was an accident on the road, and your parents have been taken to the hospital." He Yan's eyebrows shot up, and she seemed to doubt if she had heard correctly. She asked, "What did you say?" Fu Xinqing stood his ground, his voice deep and reassuring, "He Yan, don't panic. I've sent someone to the hospital to check on the situation. Let's wait for updates." She didn't reply, but her body trembled uncontrollably, the shaking growing more pronounced. Just as she was about to collapse, Fu Xinqing held her by the shoulders, providing support. Seeing her in this state, Fu Xinqing whispered her name, attempting to offer comfort. "Yan, stay calm. It might not be as serious as it seems." He Yan managed to free herself from his grasp and rushed into the living room in a frenzy. She attempted to call her mother using her mobile phone, but there was no response. Panic mounting, she dialed her father's number, only to be met with silence. Her hand shook so violently that she couldn't even press the buttons. In despair, she handed her phone to Fu Xinqing and pleaded in a quivering voice, "Please call Liang Yuanze for me." Fu Xinqing accepted the phone, dialed the number she had provided, and made the call. This time, the call went through. She took the phone back and anxiously asked, "Yuenza, what's happening? How are mom and dad?" Liang Yuenza replied with a heavy heart, "I'm so sorry, Yen Yen. I just wanted to take them for a short trip, but I didn't anticipate this accident." He Yen couldn't bear the suspense and demanded, "What happened to mom and dad?" Liang Yuenza's voice was low as he answered, "Your mother is in better condition, but your father is in critical condition. The doctors suspect a cervical spine injury." Understanding the gravity of a cervical spine injury, Fu Xinxing raised his eyes to meet He Yan's gaze, calling her name softly, "Ah Yan." He Yan didn't respond verbally. She rose abruptly, trying to leave. However, Fu Xinxing quickly grabbed her and inquired, "Where are you going?" "I need to get there immediately," He Yan replied, her voice trembling, her eyes red with panic. "I'll need my passport and a visa." "He Yan, please calm down," Fu Xinxing urged in a firm tone. "It's my parents who are in trouble, I can't stay calm," she yelled, her emotions spiraling out of control. Realizing her outburst, she attempted to explain, "Fu Xinxing, you don't understand. I drove my parents away. They didn't want to go. I sent them away for the spring festival, so I could have some peace and quiet." Seeing her agitation, Fu Xinxing continued to hold her tightly, his frown deepening as he spoke. "Don't panic. I will make the necessary arrangements." With Fu Xinxing's assistance, He Yan arrived in another country. As she disembarked from the plane, she could scarcely believe she had made it here without any hitches. Fu Xinxing remained by her side throughout the process. Apart from Fu's personnel, Liang Yuenza was also present to welcome her at the airport. Although He Yan had spoken with Liang Yuenza over the phone in the past 2 days, she struggled to keep her composure upon seeing him in person. She refrained from throwing herself into his arms and instead walked a few steps toward him. Anxious, she inquired, "How's Dad?" Liang Yuenza glanced coldly at Fu Xinxing, who was following He Yan. He replied, "Not great. He hasn't regained consciousness since last night. However, the doctors have ruled out spinal cord injury for now and are conducting further examinations." Seeing He Yan and Liang Yuenza so close together, Fu Xinxing's suspicion grew stronger, leading him to consider that this accident might have been orchestrated by them to deceive him. 13 hours before departure, Jiang had already informed Fu Xinxing in detail about the entire accident. The accident occurred when Liang Yuenza's car collided with the one in front of him. Both Liang Yuenza and his mother suffered only minor skin injuries, while He Fu, who was in the co-driver's seat, was critically injured and lost consciousness from below the neck. Initially, doctors suspected a spinal cord injury due to the violent impact on the neck. However, after thorough examination, they found no contusions or compression in the spinal cord, and all body reflexes were intact, ruling out the possibility of a spinal cord injury. Strangely, his father's consciousness gradually deteriorated, and by the previous night, he had fallen into a coma. Doctors couldn't provide a reasonable explanation for this condition. When He Yan arrived at the hospital to visit her mother, Fu Xinxing felt a sense of suspicion. Her mother looked utterly exhausted, and the grief and worry in her eyes seemed too genuine to be feigned. He Yan immediately hugged her tightly and reassured her through tears, "Mom, it's going to be all right. Don't worry, Dad will pull through." Her mother nodded, her voice hoarse as she replied, "Yes, that stubborn old man of yours promised to take care of me for the next 30 years. He hasn't fulfilled that promise yet. He won't give up easily. You have no idea how obstinate he can be." Yan continued to cry in her mother's arms, and her mother comforted her by patting her back gently while sharing stories of her father. Afterward, He Yan entered the ward where her father lay unconscious. She sat in a chair beside his bed, her eyes fixed on her father, tears streaming down her face. Fu Xinxing had been silent throughout. He Yan sobbed softly, and after a moment of hesitation, Fu Xinxing spoke in a hushed tone, "Please don't cry. I've already arranged for the best neurologist in the world to be contacted. Your father will be okay." Without uttering a word, He Yan turned around, wrapped her arms around him, and buried her head in his chest, her tears flowing freely.